Thank you very much for welcoming me to Frontend Nation. I'm super excited to be here. And yeah, fantastic intro. I really appreciate that. And today we're going to be talking about, from fragile to future-proof, solving web monetization chaos with payment systems at scale, a topic that I've been working on really closely for the past couple of years. And so I'm going to start a little bit with some recent things that I've been up to. I just spoke at ZurichJS in Athens, and I arrived from Athens earlier this week. And naturally, when I went to go travel, I live in Switzerland. And when I travel, I'm going to be spending money in euros instead of Swiss francs. And so I'm going to use one of these applications, mobile banking platforms like Revolut or Monzo to do that. A lot of us probably use Revolut when we go and move to other countries and we want to travel and we want to pay super low FX fees, or we don't want to pay any exchange fees whatsoever. And so an interesting story I like to tell is that their story of how Revolut actually exchanges money for you is really interesting. There's a lot that goes behind the scenes when you make that transaction over, let's say, switching from Swiss francs to euros. It doesn't actually convert the money on the fly. It uses a technique called liquidity pooling, and it has bank accounts in multiple currencies and has an internal ledger to simulate a real-time transfer. So if I'm transferring 100 francs into euros, it's going to try and find an equivalent exchange of euros to Swiss francs to make the swap over. So it doesn't actually have to be subjected to any FX fees. And why do I bring that little story up? The whole point is that moving money around is incredibly complicated. And when you're making payments with Apple Pay, Google Pay, or subscribing to any SaaS platform, there's a lot of things that go behind the scene to make that work and optimize that. And so we're going to be exploring that problem space today. But before you do that, a little bit more about myself. I'm currently a staff front-end engineer at a company called Small PDF, where we've got a couple tens of million odd users using a bunch of our tools around PDF management, anything from converting PDFs to merging it, or pretty much anything you want to do with a PDF on the internet. I also previously was an engineering manager at a fintech called Navro, and I travel around to conferences speaking, and I give some workshops on React performance and so on and so forth. So my previous experience very much is in the fintech world, connected TV world, and also growth and monetization teams along with fitness tech. Actually, before doing software engineering, I actually used to be a CrossFit instructor. So fitness tech is actually something I also hold quite a lot close to heart. Some of my interests are really around web performance and engineering leadership. And some of you may use Raycast. It's a really cool open source tool with a lot of open source extensions. And I work actively on the Stripe extension that there is there and a couple of other ones. I actually recently created the small PDF extension there. So that's actually really cool. And then I'm also the founder of ZurichJS, which is the Swiss local JavaScript community that I help run. So what are the struggles in this world of monetization on getting payments accepted through your web platforms? So there are a couple of things there. There's currency and localization. I'm based in Switzerland. Naturally, I want to pay in Swiss francs. Now, not everyone lives in Switzerland, so you want to be able to support for France, euros. For the US, you want to be able to support dollars. So supporting multiple currencies is incredibly important. If you have a website that's just supporting US dollars and I'm paying in Swiss francs, I'm subjected to fees. So, when you use your credit card and you're in a foreign country and you go on the credit card terminal, you've got that confusing message that shows you, do you want to pay in your local currency or the currency that's associated with your card? It's a little bit of a mess, and that introduces friction to the process. And we just want to pay in the currency that we earn and our income comes into. A lot of foreign exchange fees can be really high and reduce margins. So local currency processing can actually make a massive help. And then also we want to see things in our local currency being displayed. We want, if I earn in Swiss francs, I want to be able to associate how much of value I'm going to be charged for a particular service. There's one more thing to that. Now, a lot of online payments happen via credit card, but in recent years, there's a lot of different payment methods that have been introduced. Apple Pay came out a couple of years ago. There's Google Pay, a lot of easier methods that we can pay with. So actually optimizing for payment methods per country is incredibly important. For Brazil, you want Pix bank transfers. That's what they prefer in that region. In India, you want unified payments interface. In Netherlands, it's ideal online banking. In China, it's Alipay. We all have our local payment methods that we want to use because that's just simply integrated into what our region uses the most for transferring money. So in Switzerland, that may be Twint, for example, where a lot of people probably haven't heard of that unless you live in Switzerland. There are a couple of other things when it comes to regulation and compliance. Sanctioned countries and restricted transactions pose a lot of complexities. So if I'm no longer able to route transactions through, for example, Russia or another country, there's a lot of complexity behind stopping those payments, rerouting them, or making sure you stay compliant. Some payment methods or different payment gateways require local business entities. Now, if your business is based in Switzerland, you're not going to have an entity for every single country you operate in. That's where sometimes employer of record companies like Deal or Remo first come in, where they have a service of having entities in every single country so that they can pay salaries in local currencies and then also be compliant in that sense. And so every country also has their different regulations and compliance that you have to respect. And so you have a lot of things you're dealing with if you're integrating straight with payment providers and have to abide by all these things. Finally, there are also chargebacks and disputes. And if with chargebacks and disputes, if those go too high, let's say, for example, in Stripe, and your reputation gets damaged, depending on your business model, Stripe may kick you off, and then you lose your ability to be able to accept payments altogether. Another aspect around payment gateways and accepting money is reliability and uptime. If you've got a singular provider, let's say Stripe, that's the most common one, fantastic developer experience, we all do that. We plug and play with Stripe, and it's really easy to get started. For the ZurichJS website, for example, in 10 minutes, I had a payment flow set up, and it couldn't be easier. But at scale, that gets a little bit problematic. So Stripe does boast a 5.9 availability, so 99.99%. That gives you around 5 minutes and 16 seconds of downtime per year. That's pretty good. And a lot of the requirements from a legal perspective for a lot of fintechs require you to have a very high availability. But that doesn't mean there aren't partial outages and maintenance slots. So just because Stripe is up and accepting credit card payments, it doesn't mean that there isn't a maintenance slot happening for Alipay and you're having issues charging for that particular payment method. So there are other types of availability to consider in these scenarios. In comes this concept of payment orchestration. Think of it like air traffic control for payments and directing transactions to the best route for cost, speed, and reliability, not tying you down to just a single provider. And at scale, this makes a massive difference. So with payment orchestration, you have one system that manages multiple providers, not just Stripe, but for example, managing Revolut as a gateway, Adyen as a gateway, Braintree as a gateway, having multiple options. Then routing the cost intelligently based on rules for the transaction based on cost, success rate, or region. So if you have a lot of analytics and metrics, maybe the success rate changes depending on what payment methods or gateways you're using under the hood or processors. You also reduce reliance on a single provider. So when there's any downtime or outages of a particular payment method, you can reroute things somewhere else or have temporary solutions. And of course, you can optimize payment methods per country for a higher success rate. And we'll look at this in an example with Revolut and Stripe. So here I'm showing overlapping countries only supported by Revolut and ones only supported by Stripe. So in the case of the United Kingdom, if you want to be charging in British pounds, there's a 1.5% Stripe fee and a 20 pence fee per transaction. If you route that payment through Revolut, you have still the same 20 pence transaction fee, but there's also the 1% attached to it. So you actually make a saving there if you go with Revolut. That's an even bigger difference in France, where there's a 2.5% charge for euros. So routing through Revolut is a little bit more intelligent in that case, because you're going to be saving on a large sum of money, a lot on that percentage. Then, for example, there are regions that aren't supported by Stripe that are supported through Revolut. So if you want to extend and grow into markets that are being limited by your current provider, being able to open up to a different gateway and routing to Revolut in this scenario means you're able to start selling in Cyprus and Estonia and also have those low fees. Then the same thing for Revolut. Revolut only works in the EEA region. So if you want to be able to work in the United States and Canada, you're going to have to route things through Stripe. This gives a lot of flexibility. And there is even cases where Stripe may have payment methods that they support for maybe one-time payments or recurring payments, and they aren't supported on Revolut. And so you're able to switch which gateway is used based on what payment methods for what types of transactions they support. And we've actually integrated this at small PDF. And I'm going to give it a little bit of an example of how this looks like if you were to bake this into your front-end application. And this is a back-end concept predominantly from a payment orchestration perspective. And we're kind of introducing it here from a front-end perspective. So you start where your user opens the checkout. When your user opens the checkout, we initialize this orchestration layer, this sort of function or hook, or you want to call it, which consumes your global state and your rules configuration. For example, in a global state, you may have the user's current country. You may be actually having a bunch of A/B test segments. So maybe you're testing different payment providers, or you're testing, different currencies. So this payment orchestration layer can consume that too, to test things and see what works better in certain regions. And then a list of supported currencies. Then it goes through a decision tree, and based on the gateways that you've configured, it decides whether it's going to route something through Adyen, Stripe, or Revolut. If we take the scenario that we want to be able to support, Chinese local currency in Alipay, Stripe may be the best solution here because Stripe allows for a localized currency and Alipay. Then there's Adyen, which allows for local currency, but only credit card payments. And then Revolut doesn't support a local currency or a local payment method. So once you consume that information, you create a decision that actually chooses not just a singular gateway, but the optimal gateway and also a fallback gateway. So you want to ideally charge in this scenario, if you're going to charge in China with Alipay, with Stripe. But if, for example, Stripe's not responding, you could have a resilience pattern in place that falls back to Adyen to still process the transaction. You render the appropriate payment method, and then based on what's confirmed, you run through a series of adapters that's going to adapt the payload structure to the payment gateway you're sending information to, because naturally, the APIs for Stripe, Adyen, and Revolut differ significantly. And we'll talk about this a little bit in a second. When you're also integrating these things at a front-end level, you have to deal with a lot of providers. When you're integrating the Stripe.js SDK, you have to integrate the Stripe provider, which is going to provide context to your checkout. Now, naturally, when you're integrating something like a payment orchestration layer and have multiple gateways, you're not going to sandwich all of these context providers. You're unnecessarily bloating things. So we're not going to have Stripe and then Adyen inside that and then Revolut inside that and pass all of that context to the checkout. With a payment orchestrator, it actually may look like a payment orchestration provider, which then takes the state. In this case, we discussed a little bit about China and Chinese yuan. Then what it does under the hood is it's going to decide what's the appropriate provider to render, which in this case would be the Stripe one, and that's the context provided to the checkout. We have a little bit of a similar scenario when we're trying to actually process or submit the payment. You don't want to be using every single hook provided by the NPM packages for the payment gateways you're using. And a little bit in this scenario, you're seeing this large if condition that's deciding which method for every single gateway's object to use. So it looks a little bit different for Stripe than it does for Adyen. Stripe uses the amount value, whereas Adyen uses the value key. And this doesn't actually create a harmonious API to use for processing payments. You actually want to treat payment orchestration layers as agnostic, because your user doesn't care that what is being used under the hood, whether it's Stripe or Adyen. Your user just cares that a payment needs to be processed. When you're developing these systems, that's what you need to care about too. I just need to process a payment. And so what that ideally may look like is that you create a use payment orchestrator hook, and then you just simply say you want to process the payment, and under the hood it's decided which gateway and adapter is going to route that through. Now, what may that config look like? How are we configuring the rules of where to route certain payments? Now, you can see an example of this is what a Stripe gateway configuration may look like. It has a couple of criterias which decides in which cases it's going to be enabled or not. So in the enablement criteria, you have it only to be enabled in China. And then if you have a feature flag or an experiment being run, let's say a Stripe gateway feature flag, be able to toggle it on and off, you have that defined there too. And then for currencies, you don't want to define anything because you're happy with multiple currencies being provided as an option. And naturally there, since Alipay is what we're going to use in China, that's what we're defining also in its enabled state. So it's going to be enabled in China. Now, how simple does it actually look if we wanted to extend this configuration and add another payment method? And if you wanted to add PayPal now through the Stripe gateway configuration, you just define PayPal as a method. You define an enablement criteria as in it's only enabled in the US, and that's how easy it is. Now, if we take a little bit of a case study of a 10 million ARR business, we can kind of break down how much an orchestration layer can actually save us. So for 10 million ARR for a business running 24/7, 365, which most SaaS platforms do, you can kind of estimate your hourly revenue is around about $1,140. Naturally, seasonality and awake and sleep times change this, but this is about an average. If you have a 99.9% availability that you're dealing with in terms of your payment gateways, up to 8 hours and 41 minutes of downtime leads to a significant loss of around about maybe 10,000 per year. So being able to route to different payment gateways when things go wrong is incredibly useful. Even in scenarios where you want to optimize for savings based on fees, for 10 million ARR business, let's say a subset of that of your global revenue is coming from the EEA. 4 million of that, for example, if you're moving all of that money through Revolut Pay instead of Stripe, which has a 1% fee versus a 2.9% fee, then you can actually be saving $76,000 at a business of that size. That makes an incredible difference in terms of your bottom line. But there's also another advantage, which is the uplift with payment methods. Prioritizing the right payment method, like Pix payments in Brazil versus credit card, actually increases your conversion rate by 5 to 15%. And on top of that, reduces the high credit card fees of 2 to 4%. And then you have another benefit of those chargebacks risks being reduced. So you have a little bit of a combined uplift in terms of more users wanting to convert, lower fees for you to pay, and then also your reputation damage is a little bit lower at risk. Now, I think this is really cool to see as a demo, and I'm going to show how this is actually integrated at the Small PDF website. So if you ever go to Small PDF and you click on create a free trial and create an account, you can actually see we load the initial UI where we have PayPal and credit card as an option. Here we're doing it in Great Britain, for example, where we show you that you can create the subscription in British pounds. Now, if we were to go and change this to China, what you can actually see is PayPal is not supported in China. So we're only going to show you a credit card terminal. If I wanted to enable an experiment for Stripe being used, we're automatically going to be able to see reactively that Alipay is loaded, which is optimized for that region. So having a reactive orchestration layer is really useful in this case. Again, if we go to the US, having PayPal card and Google Pay enabled means that we're able to have different sets of payment methods shown for different countries. So this means that users are also not overwhelmed with too many options, and we kind of hint them towards the best place to go. Like in Germany, SEPA payments are incredibly popular for processing payments, and so that's what's rendered in those scenarios. And if we look all the way through here and we switch finally to India, under the hood, it's still a credit card terminal similar to before, but the UI is a little bit different because that's loading Adyen under the hood. And that means that the processing rate is a little bit better than if we were loading something else. So just because you're processing with credit card doesn't mean that having different gateways can't give you an advantage. Now, from a front-end perspective, what's actually really cool is you're not going to increase your bloat too much. What you're able to do is actually decide reactively which CDN you're going to be loading all of your SDKs from, which would be traditionally your NPM packages, and you can dynamically decide based on the global state which one you want to load. And so what that did for us, a Small PDF, is that actually reduced our bundle size by 70%, meaning that when we want to decide if we want to process by Stripe, we load everything we need necessary to display the Stripe UI. But if we decide we want to show you Adyen, we'll load everything appropriately for Adyen. This is incredibly important when you're servicing regions that have low bandwidth, such as, for example, in India. So you don't want to be on a 3G network loading something with an incredibly large bundle size, and being able to optimize and load only what you need from a checkout perspective has a massive impact on conversion rates. There's a lot of chaos to untangle there, and this is just the beginning, but I really encourage exploring the idea of payment orchestration, which is not something new in the finance world, but bringing it to the front-end world and improving conversion and the experience for our users can actually change things a lot at scale. Thank you very much for listening out all the stuff around chaos in monetization. My name is Faris, and I appreciate you taking the time with me. And if you want to connect on my LinkedIn, that's the QR code for it.
Hey, damn. That was a very well done talk with a very fast pace. That's quite impressive. Well played, Faris.
Thank you.
Also, I definitely don't have any deep experience like that into the how to get things paid online. So that's very interesting. Okay, thanks a lot. We have a few questions from the audience.
Awesome.
And I think that those are like extremely scary questions, as in how do you handle failures and retries when handling payment?
So retries are a little bit of a interesting one because you never want to actually retry a payment or anything that's considered a mutation. Retries are a typical resilience pattern for when you're querying something because something may be down and you want to be able to retrieve the information, but you actually never know if you're retrying a payment that you're causing multiple charges down the line. When you're dealing with all this payment orchestration, you're actually dealing with a lot of webhooks that are coming in to validate that cards have been charged or not been charged. So there can actually be cases where your subscription has successfully been provisioned, but the card's not been charged. Or the subscription fails to have been provisioned and the card has been charged. And you, based on that failure of subscription creation, you retry multiple times. So when it comes to monetization, you actually never go for retries. What you do is you optimize the experience for the user by providing the best error handling you can and manual retry mechanisms. So you notify the user of what happened and you let them retry. This gets a little bit complicated when you have multiple gateways because Adyen and Stripe and Revolut are going to have their different error messages. So harmonizing those and creating your own internal error messages to complement the ones coming from the downstream provider is really crucial here.
Yeah, it's also a bit scary if you say, oh, the 10,000 bill didn't pass. Oh, yeah, I'll send it. Oh, it passed. Yeah, I'll send it again.
And what's worse than all of that is that you lose customer trust. And it's better to keep the customer trust.
Indeed. It's just better to eat the bullet sometimes and keep them happy rather than the opposite. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you use any kind of monitoring and alerting for system reliability?
Definitely. You really need to know when something's going wrong and you need to know it fast. Especially when it comes to webhook failures. And for example, if their webhook's not being sent, you need to know what the retry delays for those webhooks are and all those sort of things. It's incredibly important to understand that when subscriptions are being created, you get an idea of what was the gateway selected or what was the payment method used or the currency used. Because when you now have this configuration and hopefully a unit tested configuration, you want to understand the decisions that it's making, and it's making predictable and pure decisions, but you want to understand at a scale when you have 100,000 or 1 million users, what's the majority of which gateway being used? How many times is that gateway failing? Based on that monitoring, do I want to route more of that through Revolut versus Adyen? So this tells you how to reactively change your configuration. And also from a compliance perspective, if you don't know about any failures happening, or let's say you're meant to be charging users in euros instead of in local currency for Swiss francs, and you're charging the wrong thing, understanding your monetary loss there is also really important. But for these financial institutes, there are legal checks that need to be made around your uptime and when things go wrong and what your mean time to resolution is. So having DORA metrics in place to understand what your change failure rate is and how long it takes for you to resolve that improves customer trust. And also, if you ever get audited from a financial perspective, depending on if you have a banking license or an electronic money license, that can actually change your reputation and whether you keep those licenses or not.
Yeah, definitely. The legal part is not only about just customers, it's also, okay. That was very, very, very thorough. I think that people might reach out to you if they have any further questions.
100%.
Because that's quite a complex topic. But thanks a lot, Faris. Thanks again. And
thank you for your
have an
time.
amazing day.